Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something foundational, economics 101, almost, supply and demand.
Absolutely. We're using chapter 4 from an 11th edition text as our guide here.
And the plan is to really get our heads around how these forces, shape basically every market out there.
Exactly. These really are the building blocks. Once you get how supply and demand work together, it really changes how you look at commerce.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll dig into what drives them and, how they interact to create the economic world we see.
Okay, let's unpack it then, starting with demand. Now, it's more than just saying I want that, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, much more.
The source material is clear. There are like three key parts. First, you got to actually want the thing, the good or service.
Right, the desire.
Second, you need the means. You have to be able to afford it.
Crucial point. No money, no economic demand.
And third, and this is interesting, you need a definite plan to buy it. It's about real intent.
Exactly. Wanting a sports car is one thing. Having the cash and actually planning to go to the dealership, that's demand.
So it separates wishes from actual economic action.
Precisely. And the text also defines quantity demanded. That's the specific amount people plan to buy, but at a particular price and during a specific time period. Like, how many coffees will people buy this morning at $3?
Got it. A specific snapshot, which leads us straight into, well, the law of demand. This feels pretty central.
It is. It's a cornerstone concept.
It says other things equal. We should probably talk about that bit. There's this inverse relationship. Price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Makes intuitive sense, right?
It does. And that other things equal phrase, or ceteris paribus, if you want the Latin, is super important.
Why is that?
It means we're trying to isolate just the effect of the price changing. We're assuming, just for this moment, that nothing else changes. Not your income, not the price of other stuff, not your tastes.
Okay, so we're freezing everything else to see only the price effect.
Exactly. And the reason this usually happens is because of the substitution effect. If the price of, say, your favorite cereal jumps, you might think, maybe I'll try that other brand this week. You substitute.
Right, you look for alternatives when things get pricey.
Precisely.
And we can actually visualize this with the demand curve. It's a graph, yeah.
Yep. A graphical representation. It plots out the relationship between different possible prices of a good and the quantity people are willing and able to buy at each of those prices.
And because of that inverse relationship we just talked about, higher price, less demand, it slopes downwards from left to right.
Always downwards. The example in the text with energy bars shows it perfectly. At $2.50, maybe $5 million are demanded.
But drop the price way down to, say, 50 cents.
And suddenly, boom, maybe 22 million are demanded weekly. You can see the market reacting right there on the graph.
Okay, that downward slope is key. Now, here's something the chapter really emphasizes. The difference between moving along that curve versus the whole curve shifting.
Yes, a critical distinction. A movement along the curve happens only, and I mean only, when the price of that specific good changes. Nothing else.
So if the price of energy bars goes from $1.50 to $1, we just slide down the existing curve to a new point showing a higher quantity demanded.
Exactly. You're still on the same demand schedule, just at a different price point.
But a shift in demand, that's different. That's when the entire curve moves either left or right.
Right. A shift means that at every single price, people now want to buy a different amount than they did before. Something fundamental has changed, but it's not the price of the good itself.
So the underlying relationship between price and quantity has changed.
Precisely. Remember, demand is that whole schedule, the whole curve. A shift means the entire schedule changes.
Okay, so what kind of things cause the whole curve to shift? The book lists a few key factors.
It does. These are the non-price determinants of demand.
First up is income, society's income. This seems pretty straightforward, but there's a twist, right? With normal versus inferior goods.
Exactly. For most goods, what we call normal goods, if people's incomes go up, they tend to buy more of that good. Makes sense.
Like the energy bars again. More income, maybe people feel they can afford more or treat themselves.
Right. So for a normal good, an increase in income shifts the demand curve to the right. More demanded at every price.
But then there are inferior goods. What's the deal with those?
Inferior goods are things people tend to buy less of as their income rises. Maybe they switch to something they perceive as higher quality.
Like maybe basic supermarket own brand stuff versus premium brands.
Yeah.
Or maybe bus travel versus buying a car.
Could be. So for an inferior good, an increase in income actually shifts the demand curve to the left, less demanded at every price because people are upgrading.
Interesting. Okay, second factor, prices of other goods. This brings in substitutes and complements.
Yes, substitutes are goods you can use in place of each other, like butter and margarine or Coke and Pepsi.
Okay.
Now, if the price of a substitute goes up, say Coke gets more expensive, what happens to the demand for Pepsi?
Well, people might switch to Pepsi because it's relatively cheaper now, so demand for Pepsi would increase.
Exactly. The demand curve for Pepsi shifts right.
Makes sense. And complements. Those are things used together.
Right, like printers and ink cartridges, or maybe hot dogs and hot dog buns.
Ah, okay.
If the price of a complement falls, say, printers go on a huge sale, people might buy more printers, and if they buy more printers,
They'll need more ink. So the demand for ink cartridges would go up. A rightward shift for ink demand.
you got it. And conversely, if printers got super expensive, demand for ink would likely fall, a leftward shift.
Okay, substitutes and complements.
Yeah.
Got it. What's next?
Factor 3, tastes and preferences. This one's a bit fuzzier, maybe, but hugely important.
Like fads and trends.
Exactly. If something suddenly becomes fashionable or is endorsed by a celebrity or maybe new health information comes out.
Like if studies show energy bars are even healthier than we thought.
Right. Demand would likely surge. The whole curve shifts, right? Even if prices and incomes are unchanged. Fashion, health scares, advertising, they all play into this.
Okay. Fourth factor, expectations. What we think will happen in the future.
Yeah, this is about future prices or availability. If you expect the price of gasoline to jump next week,
You fill up your tank today.
exactly. Current demand increases shifts right because of an expectation about the future. Or if you think there might be a shortage of something soon, you might stock up now.
Human psychology playing a role in economics.
Absolutely. And finally, the fifth factor mentioned is taxes and subsidies, specifically those affecting consumers.
Right. If the government puts a big tax on sugary drinks,
Yeah.
that makes them more expensive effectively.
Which generally reduces the quantity people want to buy at any given market price. So demand decreases, shifting the curve left.
And subsidies, like
Mhm.
maybe a rebate for buying an electric car.
That effectively lowers the cost for the consumer, making it more attractive. So demand increases, shifting the curve right.
Okay, so those five are the big shifters for demand. Income, prices of related goods, tastes, expectations, and taxes subsidies for consumers.
That's a good summary of the key ones from the text.
Now, we've been talking about individual choices, but markets involve lots of people. How do we get to market demand?
It's actually pretty logical. The market demand curve is just the horizontal sum of all the individual demand curves of everyone in that market.
Horizontal sum, meaning,
You pick a price, say $10 for a movie ticket. You see how many tickets Alice wants at $10, how many Bruce wants at $10, how many Carmen wants at $10. You add all those quantities together.
okay, so you add up the quantities each person wants at each specific price.
Exactly. You do that for every possible price, plot those total quantities against the prices, and voila, you have the market demand curve. The chapter shows this with Alice, Bruce, and Carmen.
And does the law of demand still hold for the whole market? Does the market curve still slope down?
Oh, absolutely. For two main reasons, really. One, at lower prices, existing buyers often decide to buy more.
Right, the people already buying energy bars might buy a few extra if they're cheaper.
And second, lower prices can attract completely new buyers into the market. People who couldn't afford it or didn't think it was worth it at the higher price might jump in when the price falls.
So it works on both the intensive margin people buying more and the extensive margin new people buying.
Nicely put. That's the idea.
Okay, that covers the demand side pretty thoroughly. Shall we switch over to supply?
Let's do it, the other side of the market coin.
And just like demand, supply has its own fundamental law, the law of supply.
It does. And it works in the opposite direction to the law of demand.
How so?
The law of supply states that, again, other things equal, there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supply.
Direct, meaning?
Meaning, as the price of a good goes up, producers are generally willing and able to supply more of it, and as the price goes down, they tend to supply less.
Okay, that makes sense from a business perspective. If you can sell something for a higher price, you're more motivated to produce and sell more of it.
Exactly. Higher prices often mean potentially higher profits, which is a big incentive. The textbook mentions a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
One is substitution in production. If the price of energy bars goes way up, a company that also makes, say, granola might shift resources towards making more energy bars because they're more profitable now.
Ah, switching production lines to chase the higher prices.
Kind of. And the other reason is simply that, assuming production costs don't change wildly, a higher selling price just makes producing each unit more profitable, encouraging increased output.
Makes sense. More profit potential, more supply.
And just like demand, we can graph this with the supply curve.
Okay, and since the relationship is direct, higher price, higher quantity supplied this curve slopes.
Upwards, from left to right, showing that producers offer more for sale as the price rises.
Got it. Demand down, supply up. Now, is there a similar distinction between quantity supplied and supply itself?
Yes, absolutely parallel to the demand side. Quantity supplied is the specific amount offered for sale at one particular price. It's a single point on the supply curve.
So if the price changes, we just move along the existing supply curve to a different point.
Correct. A change in the price of the good itself causes a movement along the curve, changing the quantity supplied.
Whereas supply, the whole concept is the entire curve, the whole relationship.
Exactly. Supply refers to the entire schedule of quantities producers are willing to sell at all the different possible prices.
So a shift in supply means the whole curve moves left or right.
Right, meaning producers now want to supply a different amount at every price. And again, this is caused by factors other than the goods' own price changing.
Okay, let's talk about those supply shifters. What makes the whole supply curve move? First one mentioned is the price of inputs.
Yeah, inputs are the resources used to produce the good labor, raw materials, energy, machinery.
So if the cost of, say, the oats and nuts used in energy bars goes up,
That increases the cost of production. It makes it less profitable to produce at any given selling price. So suppliers will likely offer less. The supply curve shifts to the left.
less supply. And if input costs fall,
Cheaper production, more profitable, supply increases, shifting the curve to the right.
okay, input prices. Makes sense. Second factor, technology.
Technology is usually a positive one for supply. Advances in technology often mean more efficient production.
Like a new machine that makes energy bars faster or with less waste?
Exactly. That lowers production costs or allows more output with the same inputs. Either way, it generally increases supply, shifting the curve right. New products are also a result of tech changes.
Cool. Third factor, state of nature. This sounds unpredictable.
It often is. This covers things like weather, natural disasters, climate patterns, things mostly outside our control that affect production.
Like a really good harvest for agricultural products means more supply.
Right, bumper crop, supply shifts, right. But a drought or a flood or a hurricane that damages factories.
That would decrease supply,
Yeah.
shift the curve left.
Yeah,
You can see that happening.
definitely. Fourth factor, expected future prices. This is the supply side version of expectations.
So if producers think the price of energy bars is going to shoot up next month,
They might hold back some of their current inventory. Why sell it now for $1.50 if you think you can get $2 next month?
so they reduce current supply to sell later at a higher price.
Correct. A belief in higher future prices can decrease current supply, shifting the curve left.
Clever. Okay, what else? Number of suppliers.
This one's pretty straightforward. If more firms enter the market and start producing energy bars,
The total amount available at any price goes up. Market supply increases.
rightward shift. And if firms leave the market, maybe due to losses or consolidation,
Supply decreases. Leftward shift. Fewer producers, less total product.
exactly. And the last factor listed, again paralleling demand, is taxes and subsidies, but this time aimed at producers.
Okay, so a tax on the production of energy bars.
That increases the cost for the supplier, like an input cost increase. So it generally decreases supply, shifting the curve left.
And a subsidy. Maybe the government wants to encourage energy bar production for some reason.
A subsidy lowers a producer's costs, makes production cheaper or more profitable. So it generally increases supply, shifting the curve right.
Okay, so for supply shifts, input prices, technology, state of nature, future price expectations, number of suppliers, and tax subsidies on producers.
Those are the main drivers, according to the text.
And just like market demand is the sum of individual demands, market supply is the sum of individual supplies.
Precisely. You take the quantity each individual producer, like Anne, Barry, and Charlie in the movie example, is willing to supply at a given price, add them all up horizontally and do that for every price. That gives you the market supply curve.
Adding up all the individual willingnesses to sell at each price.
You got it.
Okay, we've got demand figured out, we've got supply figured out. Now for the main event, putting them together. Market equilibrium.
Right. This is where the action happens, where buyers and sellers interact. Equilibrium is basically a state of balance.
Balance between...
Between the forces of supply and demand, it's the point where they offset each other. Specifically, it happens at the price where the quantity consumers demand is exactly equal to the quantity producers supply.
The plans of buyers perfectly match the plans of sellers.
Exactly. No pressure for things to change at that specific point.
And that point gives us two key things, right? The equilibrium quantity.
Which is the actual amount of the good that gets bought and sold in the market when it's in balance.
And the equilibrium price.
Which is the price at which that quantity is exchanged. The text calls it the price the market naturally gravitates towards, guided by that invisible hand.
Ah, the invisible hand. Adam Smith.
Yeah.
The idea that individual actions, buyers wanting low prices, sellers wanting high prices, somehow lead to this stable market outcome.
Kind of, yeah. It's the market finding its own level through the interaction of all these participants. Now, what if the price isn't at equilibrium?
Good question. What happens then? The book talks about excess supply and excess demand.
Right. Let's say the current market price is above the equilibrium price. What would happen?
Well, at a higher price, suppliers want to sell more, right? Law of supply. But buyers want to buy less. Law of demand.
So you've got quantity supplied being greater than quantity demanded. That's excess supply or a surplus.
Too much stuff sitting on the shelves that nobody's buying at that high price.
Exactly. And what do sellers do when they have unsold inventory piling up?
To lower the price, to try and sell it off, like sales and discounts.
Precisely. That surplus puts downward pressure on the price, pushing it back down towards the equilibrium level.
Okay. And the opposite scenario, if the price is below equilibrium.
Well, at a lower price, buyers want to buy more, but sellers want to sell less.
So quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. That sounds like a shortage?
It is. Excess demand or a shortage. Lots of eager buyers, but not enough goods available at that low price.
Like trying to get concert tickets for a super popular band right when they go on sale.
Good example. And what happens when there's a shortage? Buyers might start offering higher prices, or sellers realize they can charge more because demand is so high.
So the shortage puts upward pressure on the price.
Right. Pushing it back up towards that equilibrium point where the shortage disappears. The graphs in the text show this process really clearly, how prices adjust to eliminate surpluses and shortages.
So the market has this kind of self-correcting mechanism, pushing towards equilibrium.
In the basic model, yes. But it's worth noting, as the book does, that sometimes other forces interfere.
Like what?
Political or social forces. Think about minimum wage laws, which set a price floor for labor, or rent controls, which set a price ceiling on housing. These can sometimes prevent the market price from reaching its natural equilibrium.
Ah, so real-world interventions can sometimes override the pure economic forces and lead to ongoing shortages or surpluses.
They can. It adds complexity. Now, back to the core model. What happens to that equilibrium point if one of the underlying curves shifts?
Right, because we know things like income or technology do change.
Exactly. So let's say there's an increase in demand. Maybe those energy bars get a great review. The demand curve shifts right.
Okay, so at the old equilibrium price, people now want to buy more than suppliers are selling.
Yeah.
That's a shortage.
Right. And what does a shortage do to price?
Pushes it up.
Exactly. The price rises until it hits a new equilibrium point where the new higher demand curve intersects the original supply curve. So the result is a higher equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity traded.
Okay. What if supply decreases, like that input cost increase we talked about? Supply curve shifts left.
Same logic. At the old price, suppliers are offering less, but demand hasn't changed. Again, you get a shortage.
Shortage pushes the price up.
Right. To a new, higher equilibrium price. But this time, because supply decreased, the new equilibrium quantity will be lower than before. The text shows this graphically, too.
So, increase in demand, price up, quantity up, decrease in supply, price up, quantity down.
You got it. Now flip it. What about a decrease in demand? Maybe people lose interest in energy bars. Demand curve shifts left.
Okay, leftward shift. At the old price, people want less than suppliers are offering. That's a surplus.
And a surplus pushes the price. Correct. To a new, lower equilibrium price. And since demand fell, the equilibrium quantity also falls.
Lower price, lower quantity. Makes sense. Last one, an increase in supply. Maybe that new technology kicks in. Supply shifts right.
More supply means, at the old price, quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. Surplus again.
Surplus pushes the price down.
Yep. To a new, lower equilibrium price. But because supply increased, the equilibrium quantity will be higher than before.
Okay, so decrease in demand, price down, quantity down. Increase in supply, price down, quantity up.
That covers the four basic shifts and their effects on equilibrium price and quantity, assuming only one curve shifts at a time. The text summarizes these nicely.
That's a really powerful framework for thinking about why prices change.
It really is. It helps predict how different events, a change in consumer tastes, a new tax, a technological breakthrough, a bad harvest, might affect the prices and availability of goods.
But the textbook also mentions some limitations, right? It's
Yeah.
not always quite this simple.
No model is perfect. It points out a few things. One is that sometimes supply and demand aren't totally independent. They can influence each other in more complex ways.
Okay,
Also, that other things held constant assumption is useful for the model. But in the real messy economy, lots of things are changing all at once, which makes isolating effects harder.
right. It's not a controlled experiment.
Not usually. And finally, it mentions the fallacy of composition.
What's that again?
It's the trap of assuming that what's true for one part, like one specific market or individual, is automatically true for the whole economy. Sometimes interactions at the macro level have different outcomes.
So supply and demand analysis is a fantastic tool, especially for specific markets. But we need to be aware it has its simplifications and context matters.
Precisely. It's the foundation, but not the entire building.
Okay, so let's quickly recap this deep dive into Chapter 4. We started with demand, wanting, affording, planning.
And the law of demand, that inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, giving us the downward sloping demand curve.
Then the crucial difference. Moving along the curve, only price changes, versus the whole curve shifting due to income-related goods prices, tastes, expectations, or taxes subsidies.
And how individual demands add up horizontally to create market demand.
Then we switch to supply. The law of supply, the direct relationship, price up, quantity supplied up.
Leading to the upward sloping supply curve. Again, distinguishing movements along the curve from shifts of the entire curve.
And those supply shifts caused by input prices, technology, nature, future expectations, number of suppliers, and producer taxes subsidies.
And how individual supplies sum up to market supply.
Finally, we brought them together at market equilibrium, where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, setting the equilibrium price and quantity.
We looked at what happens with surpluses, excess supply pushes price down, and shortages, excess demand pushes price up.
And how shifts in either supply or demand lead to predictable changes in the equilibrium outcome, while also acknowledging real-world complexities and the model's limitations.
It really is the bedrock, these principles. Understanding supply and demand gives you such a powerful lens for viewing the economic world.
Absolutely. You start seeing it everywhere. Why gas prices fluctuate, why certain items are hard to find sometimes, why sales happen. It's all supply and demand at its core, isn't it?
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
Even when other factors are layered on top.
So we really encourage you, the listener, to think about this next time you're shopping or reading the news. Where do you see supply and demand playing out? What other forces might be influencing things?
It's a great exercise, and maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on those complexities. In our modern world, we see more maybe truly unexpected large-scale disruptions, things like, pandemics or sudden major geopolitical shifts or maybe radical AI advancements. How might these kinds of novel, really unforeseen events impact supply and demand in ways that maybe go